Hey y'all, it's Mary Hyatt, and I am so excited you are here for this month's topic, which is all about mindfulness. 95% of our thoughts and emotional responses and reactions are unconscious, on autopilot. We live most of our days recreating and reenacting the same day, the same life over and over again. This month, we are going to explore the power of mindfulness and how awareness is the gateway to all change and transformation in your life. If you have been feeling stuck in any area, this foundational month is going to be for you. So let's hop into it.
Welcome to the Living Fully Alive podcast with Mary Hyatt, here to help you find your authentic voice, learn how to love yourself, and embrace your life. And now, your host, life and mindset coach, body love advocate, and doTERRA Presidential Diamond, Mary Hyatt.
Hey y'all, it is Mary Hyatt, and I am so excited to let you in on the conversation that I just had with Allison Fallon. Hopefully you know her already, but she's one of my dearest friends. And every second week on the podcast for the month's theme, I bring in somebody who's close to me, a near and dear friend or family member, to have a candid conversation about the topic of the month. And Allison is an award-winning author, a sought-after public speaker, an incredible writing coach who has helped thousands of people realize their writing potential and become published authors. She just released her newest book called The Power of Writing It Down. So I was like, I got to get Allie on here to talk about how writing, whether or not you consider yourself a writer, even just the casual journaler, how that can be a part of a powerful mindfulness practice. So without further ado, here is Allison and I's candid conversation. Hey, y'all. Oh my gosh. As you just heard in the bio, Allison Fallon is on the show today. Hey, girl, what's up?
So good to be here.
All right. We're going to get into a candid conversation here in a couple minutes, but I want to do a real quick recap for those of you who didn't listen to last week's episode. I got into the kind of foundational principles of mindfulness. We talked about how to cultivate that in like an everyday moment, working through an acronym from a teacher of mine, Tara Brock, and really bringing awareness to the mundane, bringing awareness to what's happening inside of our minds, inside of our emotions. And I walk you through step by step the 5 elements of mindfulness. So it's a great episode to start with and kind of get your feet into this whole conversation that we're having all month. So if you haven't listened, go back and listen. But of course, come right back to this episode because let me just tell you, Allison, we've been friends for what, like 6 years?
6 years, I was going to say. Yeah. Since 2015 is when actually it would have been May of 2014 that we met, right? In Portland. Yeah. So
that's
more than
wild.
6 years.
That's wild.
Crazy time.
Well, I feel like for anybody who doesn't know our dynamic, they're in for a treat because we always had the best conversations. They're like so great.
It's true.
Also, welcome back to Nashville. I'm so glad you came home.
Thank you. I know it was about time, right? We just had to slowly convince my husband that this was the place to live.
I know. Well, I mean, so just as a backstory, so Allison got married. It's weird calling you Allison, but that is
you
your
can call
official.
me Allie.
Okay,
you can call me Allie.
Allie got married and she moved in with her husband in California and they had a sweet baby girl and then decided to move back to Nashville. And we were like devastated when they left and we're so excited when they came back. And so she's only been back for like a few months. And so now we get to go on walks together and enjoy just like new life, new baby life. It is.
The dream. Yep.
Well, so I was actually looking at the calendar. This is crazy, but you were on the podcast a year ago this month.
No way.
Yeah. And
that's crazy.
I hadn't remembered, but we talked about fear, and we were talking about, it was like right at the beginning of the pandemic, obviously.
Oh yeah.
And everybody was so afraid, and it was so uncertain, and nobody knew what was going on. And so we were just talking about writing as a tool to process through fear. And it's crazy to think about where you were this time last year. So for people that heard that episode, will you bring everybody up to speed as far as what does life look like now as opposed to a year ago this time?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, it's interesting. I had forgotten about that completely.
Yeah.
That we were talking. I forgot the conversation was about fear. But what was going on in my life at that time, there was a series of events like there were for many of us where like it felt like in 2020 that you were living in some alternative reality where the least likely things to happen were all happening. Yeah. So in a week's time, my sister had a massive heart attack. She was 33 years old at the time, perfectly healthy, runs 6 miles a day, young, like eats as healthy as anyone I know, has a massive heart attack, almost dies. The tornado came through Nashville and completely demolished the apartment building that I was living in right before I had left here. And I just, even though I wasn't living in the building, I know this sounds crazy, but I was like watching the drone footage of this hurricane thinking like, I was there. Like I would have been in that building and who knows what I would have experienced had I been there. And then the pandemic hit, and my husband, who works in live events and does massive cultural festivals, had to shut down his business, lost his income overnight. I mean, like lost over $1 million in business in one day.
Jeez.
So that all happened. And then I was filming videos we had just moved into an office space. So sad. Like I had like this dream of like building a team. We were all going to be in person, working together. And we had March 1st moved into this office space and we were filming these videos for the course that we were about to launch. And in LA, which is notorious for having this beautiful weather year round.
Yeah.
The videographer is there and we're filming these videos and it's like torrential downpour in LA, like pouring down rain this week, last year.
Wow.
And I was just reflecting on this the other day because I was like, what a weird time that was to be alive and to experience that week as it was unfolding. Definitely kicked up a lot of fear for me. And I was having to access all my tools that I've worked so hard to have close, know, and really having to put those to work. And now that I'm a year out looking back, and I knew this at the time, I had like a deep knowing, thanks to my tools, that I was going to be okay.
Yeah.
But now looking back, I'm like, not only am I okay, but also all of those circumstances that were quote unquote worst case scenario have all led me to this place where I am now, which is like, new opportunities, new beginnings, open doors. Like we're back in Nashville. Yeah. You live like, 2 miles from me and I can come meet you at the drop of a hat to go for a walk with my daughter.
Yeah.
And, my husband is having really amazing doors open for him career wise. He's taken a complete pivot in his career and that it's dramatically changing our lives. Like in such a beautiful way. So looking back at that conversation and thinking about fear, I'm like, it's just, I don't know that I have like a perfectly tied up bow for what to say about it other than like when you're facing fear, you can know that there's something for you on the other side of it.
Yeah. Well, and just like, I love that emphasis on having no idea, like being in that land of uncertainty, being in the land of the unknown, being in a situation that you would have never designed for yourself or orchestrated for yourself. And that yet here you are, as was everyone. I mean, it was like the pandemic was such a radical undoing for so many people, whether it was like career or emotions or, I mean, you name it. There were so many tragedies and trauma and just that feeling like, I don't know what's next. And you mentioned so many times like these tools, and I want to like hone in on mindfulness because that's something that you and I share in common. I'll get to the writing stuff in a little bit, but I'm curious because I know that you have a really strong mindfulness practice. How did that like help you as one of the tools get through the craziness of last year.
So writing specifically, are you asking about, or
well,
just
I'm just thinking like
in general?
Yeah, just in general. I think I want to get into the writing part later and like hone in on that, but I know that's not the only thing that you use.
No, it's not. So I want to say one thing that I feel like is important to add. It kind of throws a wrench in the system when we're talking about mindfulness, but I feel like this is really important to be realistic for people.
Yeah.
Because the fact of the matter is, when you're in trauma, when you're in survival, the tools that you would use, like meditation or yoga or writing or whatever, you can't really access them when you're in survival. When you're in survival, all of your energy and attention goes to meeting your basic needs. So think Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like if you have food and water and a roof over your head, then you'll move on to the next needs. But if you're worried, I was 7 months pregnant when all this is happening. My business, we had to pivot so fast. I was worried my business was going to fall apart because we had been meeting with clients in person, and I had to quickly pivot to meeting virtually. I'm the only breadwinner in my home now. I'm about to give birth to a baby. I'm trying to go on a maternity leave. So my mind, my body, my brain, my soul, my spirit went into hyper vigilance and survival mode. It was like, protect yourself, protect your baby, protect your family. And because of that, I just want to be really realistic for people that when you're in that state of mind, you're not meditating every day. You're not writing every day. You're not doing yoga. I just wasn't. I didn't have it to give.
Yeah.
But I also, one of the reasons I say that is because it's why it's so important for us to be learning those tools and integrating them into our daily practice when things are going okay.
Yeah.
Because having those as a part of my daily practice buoyed me through that time of intensity. So there was a period of time that was probably from the time the pandemic hit until the time I gave birth or shortly after, that was like 7 or 8 months where I didn't do any of those things. I wasn't writing daily. I wasn't meditating. I wasn't doing yoga. I could barely get out of the house to go for a walk. It was like, put one foot in front of the other. I want to be realistic about that for people, that like, if you're in survival, do not beat yourself up for not having access to these things, because all your energy and attention, you're biologically wired for it to be this way. All your energy and attention will go to fighting for your own survival. When you're beyond that point.
Well, I just want to pause you because I feel like that we can have like a whole conversation about that. As you're sharing that, I instantly feel like liberated on behalf of the listener, because I think there is such a expectation that we're supposed to do this thing called self-development or self-care or whatever perfectly, and that it's supposed to just be the same in every given circumstance, that like, come hell or high water, no matter what, like I have this meditation practice that I stick to and nothing will take me away from it. And if I do, it means I'm weak or I don't care enough or I'm not committed enough. And I think that's so false. And I'm so grateful of you speaking that truth, because that was the same for me. I mean, I kind of like during the pandemic ended up leading a lot of meditations for other people as a way of anchoring myself into it, because I wasn't at the place of being able to do it for myself. But there's, being a 2 on the Enneagram, it's like, in some ways I took that and like harnessed it for good, and showed up in like ultra service, which is really what kept me sane through all of that, was like helping and focusing on others, which is just my natural go-to under stress. But I think it's important to say that, because even not in a pandemic, there are seasons in life that are survival. And I love that you said biologically we're wired this way. We're like, when you were in survival, you're in that lizard reptilian part of your brain, like the part that is higher functioning, the neocortex, all of that is literally offline. So that energy for creation, that energy for reflection, that energy of analyzing the self and our emotions and processing through, it's literally not lit up in our brain. Pretty important, I think, to note.
I agree. And it's damaging for us to take on the weight of feeling like I'm in charge of, growing personally or really understanding my story, when you're in that period of time when because all of your energy needs to be focused on survival so that you can get yourself out to the other side. I was going to say too, like when you get beyond that point, this is the time when you really want to focus on understanding the story so that it doesn't get lodged in your brain or in your body in a way that is going to alter the course that you want to be on. It's also, the other reason that's important is because it's going to build a strong foundation so that when the next storm comes, you are strong enough to weather it.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad that yoga was a part of my life. I did yoga every single day for years leading up to the pandemic. And,
yeah, you did.
You know, and writing too. Writing has been in my tool belt, and therapy has been in my tool belt. I've done trauma therapy. I've done brain spotting. I've done neurofeedback. I've done all these things that we do to like grow a healthy foundation and to feel a sense of sturdiness inside our own lives. Yeah. Is that they're all bolstering us so that when the storm comes, we can survive it. And I will say, I've been through some shit in my life before. Am I allowed to say that on this podcast?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So I've been through some shit in my life before. And this time, because I had those tools in my tool belt, I knew that I knew deep in my core, for as much as I had fear on a daily basis, I knew in my core, we were going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that's really the gift. It's like you can walk through a really tough season in life and you can know the whole time, I'm going to come out on the other side of this.
Yeah. I think that's so powerful because, and I've experienced this too, and we've talked about this, like it's almost having that ability to go above, like watching yourself from 10,000 feet above your own experience. And you have enough experience and wisdom that you can say, okay, I am going to get through this. And I think that like when we think about mindfulness, oftentimes people think, okay, mindfulness is a meditation practice or mindfulness is yoga or what, all these different things. But the reality is mindfulness is just being mindful, present in any given moment. And so I think that like the gift of practicing all of the things that you've practiced to get that foundation, all of a sudden it's like, even in the midst of unbelievable fear and trauma, all of a sudden it's like you have a perspective that you can look down at what's happening in the present. And even though you're like simultaneously going through it and it's so hard and you're like, you know, I don't ever want to go through this. I don't, you know, you're in that survival. There's also a separate thought that is above the experience, that is a different type of perspective that can see beyond just the heart of the moment. And I think that to me, that is actually mindfulness, is like in the moment going, I'm experiencing grief and it's okay to be experiencing grief. Like I may not be able to meditate, but I am aware that I'm grieving. I'm aware that I'm fearful. I'm aware that I'm anxious. And it lessens the hold, I think, that it has on us when we are aware of what's happening.
I totally agree. And I think even it makes me think to say this too, because I used a lot of what we would call medicators during this time in my life when things were so challenging. Like wine or drinking is a medicator that I've used in the past, which I couldn't use because I was pregnant. But I would use sugar or eating or Netflix or scrolling on my phone or whatever as a way to just sort of like lessen the blow of the life that I was experiencing. But think about the difference in the energy between doing something like that without realizing that you're doing it to medicate versus going, listen, I know Netflix it's not getting me to my dreams. Like it's like a mindful or like a mindless checkout thing that I'm doing, but I'm making the intentional decision to do that for now because I'm coping.
Right. You're aware that
you're coping. There's a different energy. Yes. And there's a different energy when you say, I'm aware that I'm coping, I'm choosing to cope versus doing that outside of your own awareness. And I think that's what you're getting at. But I wanted to add that for the listener, because if you're going through a really hard time in your life and you're kicking yourself because you're like spending too much time on Instagram, or, you know, maybe you're having 2 or 3 glasses of wine at night and you're just like, oh gosh, I can't even get this under control. See what happens if instead of trying to change the behavior, you simply say to yourself, listen, I know it's not the healthiest choice to have 3 glasses of wine before I go to bed, but I'm choosing this tonight because it's the best that I can do and it makes me feel better for now. and just see, I'm not trying to suggest people should drink too much wine.
Right.
I'm just saying like, see what happens when you bring that energy and that compassion for yourself to the behavior. See if the behavior naturally kind of releases its hold on you.
I think this is really amazing. It's making me think of so many different things. I was just today flipping through Tara Brach's book, Radical Acceptance, and this concept of like saying yes to whatever is here. And acceptance isn't necessarily even condoning or saying it's the best choice. It's just accepting it. Like, here's where I'm at today. And I remember this like at the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know if you remember this, but there was like a couple weeks, I think this is when we were like in strict lockdown, where everybody was treating it like spring break, at least here in Nashville. Like, so I live on the edge of this park. And so people were outside in convertibles and everybody was day drinking. And like, there was people in their front yards with signs that would say like, honk, if you're, and I'll drink if you honk or whatever. I'll take a sip when you honk.
Oh my gosh.
It was like mayhem, and I was like, yeah, this is great. And I like got on board, and Lindsley and I would sit on the front lawn. We didn't have the sign with the honk and drink, but we had our cocktails and our wine or whatever. And then it kind of quickly turned into, oh, this is not like a quick thing. Like we're home for 2 weeks and then we're going to be done. Like the trauma of it, the tragedy of it began to sink in. And I found myself drinking every day, and not to excess, but it was like, an absolute means of coping. And it was that moment for myself when I said, can I accept that I'm human? Yeah. Can I accept that this is really hard right now? And can I accept and bring awareness to, I am choosing to cope in this way. Now, tomorrow I might decide that there's a better choice that I can choose, like taking a bath or calling a friend or whatever. But right now, kind of like we said, I've got nothing left. And so I've been, in high beta, stressed out, red zone all day. I need to check out. And I think it was for me that radical acceptance, that turning point of just saying yes to what was here, that then over the course of the next few days, probably a week, I was like, yeah, I don't want to even be doing this. Like I need to be present for what's here and be loving and kind to myself in a different way. And so I stopped drinking every night, and I really would drink maybe once a week. And it was a radical shift for me. But I think to your point, when we can bring compassion to, hey, there's no such thing as perfection. And sometimes all we have is our tools to cope. And then when we have a little bit more energy or awareness, we can choose something that's life-giving and nourishing and nurturing. But right now, it's like the cookie, the wine, the Netflix, and that's okay.
It's real.
It's real.
Yeah.
I like that. It's real. It is real, isn't it? Like, I feel like this conversation is so life-giving to me, because I think when we see on social media is the opposite of this conversation.
Yeah.
It's just a little curated bubble that keeps looking at perfection from all different angles and can make us feel not enough, or like a slacker or a loser or unhealthy or whatever it might be. And I think the reality is, we went through something really, really intense. There's a lot of grace for that. There's a lot of grace
traumatic.
For that.
I mean, I keep saying too, like we need to call this experience what it was, because everybody had a different experience of the pandemic. Yeah. Your experience is different than mine. It's different even than my husband's, even though we were in the same house. So, but collectively, it was a trauma. It was a global trauma that we've all lived through. And so I think, and even energetically, I know you feel this way. I don't know if listeners can identify with this, but even energetically, like even as like my life started to become a little more stabilized after my daughter was born, when we were living in LA at the time, and the George Floyd was killed, and the Black Lives Matter movement had like a resurgence, I guess you could call it. And there were marches happening all over the city. Energetically, I was like feeling all of the trauma of that experience, or the trauma of that death and the dozens of others or hundreds of others. And then the energy of like all the movement in the city. It was like I just want to acknowledge that we have lived through this together. And even if you haven't lost your job or lost a loved one or, lived alone for a year, which I know so many people have, but even if that's not you, you've lived through this global trauma with the rest of us. Yeah. So it's not crazy that you'd be feeling it.
Well, and it just makes me want to encourage everyone listening, even now, like here we are, literally the week of a year to date when everything got shut down. And I think it's no accident that we're having this conversation right now, because it's a beautiful time to have a mindfulness reflection of where am I at emotionally with all of this? Like, I think we're so eager to put this behind us, and we're so eager to get back to quote unquote normal life. And I thank God we are well on our way to that place. And thank God there's light at the end of the tunnel and we can see it. And it's really exciting. I think there is an opportunity here to honor and acknowledge what we've been through. And to me, that idea of being mindful of like, let me pause to check in. Like, is there anything that's left to process? Is there anything left to give voice to? Even like, I know for me, it was way after the fact that I processed what was going on. Like I went into coping mode, which for me is overworking. And I was online every day, leading these guided meditations, leading these lives. And I, to survive, was distracting myself by, just doubling down on my work. So I didn't feel the effects for months later. And I remember it just hit me all of a sudden one day, and I just started bawling. It was like every cell in my being was feeling all of that. It didn't make any sense because it was, delayed, and it was after the shutdown, after the quarantine and all of that, the official quarantine. But I think that now that we have this year behind us, it's like, what do we need to grieve? Where do I feel it in my body? Am I carrying any of that trauma inside of my body that needs to be like processed through and let go of? So I would just encourage anyone listening to take a moment to reflect on that today and just honor and acknowledge, and also just be mindful of what's still here. Is there anything that's needing attention or compassion or tenderness or love as we, embark on new life, on spring is really, this new season of life coming in. And that has me thinking, Allie, about writing. And I do want to transition into that, because I think in my own life, this tool of journaling. Now I want to use that language because I think some of us don't think of ourselves as quote unquote writers, but just this idea of bringing pen to paper is so cathartic for me. It's something that even if I forget about it for a time, I always come back to it. And what I love about what you teach is the actual benefits of what this is doing to our brains, to our emotions. So for people that don't really know the official benefits, will you just walk us through that for a sec?
Sure. It's helpful sometimes to know that there's data that shows that this thing that you're doing it intuitively and you're doing it naturally. But it's sometimes helpful to just know that there's science to back this up. Right. I had been working with writers for over a decade, helping people outline books for publication. And I started to notice that there was this trend where people would be working on a book and they would start to experience positive benefits in other parts of their life that had nothing to do with the book itself. So we'd be working on a book for publication, but then they would say, this book is writing this book, something about it is really having this positive impact on my marriage, or it's really having this positive impact on my career or my finances or whatever. And at first I thought it was just confirmation bias. It was one of those things where when you think you want to buy a car, then suddenly you see that car everywhere on the street, on the road. I was like, this is just my thing and I love writing. And so I'm just trying to push this on other people. But that was when I stumbled across this huge body of data that shows that writing is one of the most powerful tools we have at our disposal to generate meaningful change in our lives. So this is not just me. I'm not crazy. This is based on brain science. You're not crazy if you feel intuitively drawn to writing. I always say writing is human instinct. It's communication. It's spirituality. It's prayer. So no wonder you feel drawn to the act of writing. But the data shows that a regular practice of writing, which in the research is defined as 20 minutes a day for 4 days in a row, that a regular practice of writing can strengthen your immune system. It makes you 43% less likely to visit the doctor for upper respiratory infections and flu.
What? Dang.
Truly. I mean,
that's a really high percentage.
Totally. I mean, it makes me think about you and I when we got together and walked the other day and we were talking about Joe Dispenza, who I quote in my book, and we were talking about meditations and like coronavirus and vaccines, and we were just talking about like the connection between the mind and the body and how powerful. It's not that viruses don't exist and they don't actually invade our immune system and they don't actually attack our bodies and they don't actually kill. I'm not trying to pretend like those 3D realities aren't real. Yeah. But our minds are also incredibly powerful. And I think what the data around writing shows is exactly that. It's that when you put your mind to work for you, that you can actually strengthen your body's ability to fight off these pathogens.
It's amazing.
So it seems crazy and woo-woo, but there's data that supports this.
Well, you know, I'm incredibly woo-woo. We all know it. But I also geek out on like the science piece of this because it is, as Dr. Joe would say, like the language of the mystics. And science really does, and now can really offer us insight into these practices like meditation or writing or yoga or breath work that have been used for centuries as healing modalities. And now we have the science to show what's happening on brain scans or to the heart or to the cells and to the immune system. And meditation is incredibly powerful as well for boosting the immune system. But when you come back to it, it's all, whether it's writing or whether it's meditation, it is focusing in on the language of our thoughts, the narrative that we're giving what's happening in our life, that activation of the creative centers of the brain, moving from survival to those other parts of the brain, bringing those brain waves down from survival to our parasympathetic nervous system, you know, where we're resting and digesting and integrating. And I know that for me, like one of the best examples for that is from like a non-scientific or woo-woo standpoint. I remember when I was younger, I've been seeing therapists since I think I was 13 years old. And I struggled with a lot of anxiety, like from young age. And I'm so grateful that I had a therapist that helped me use journaling as a way to process through my anxiety. And I was a teenager. I could have cared less about the science or any of that. I just knew that when I sat down and wrote how I was feeling, when I sat down and sometimes I needed to write a friend an imaginary letter or my parents an imaginary letter or, you know, a quote unquote enemy, an imaginary letter, and just, you know, emotionally vomit on the page, I felt better. Like the proof was in the pudding. Like I felt better. And I think that it's that idea, my little sweet 13-year-old self, like how powerful that was then, it's still equally as powerful now. So cool.
Yeah. I mean, I say this all the time about meditation when I try to convince people to start using Dr. Joe Dispenza's meditations. I'll always say, like, you know, there's all kinds of science that backs this up and proves that it's really effective. But regardless of any of that, it just makes me feel better. So I'm like, you know, 20 minutes a morning, if it can make you feel better, writing or meditating or yoga or whatever it is, then why not do it? I 100% agree with you there.
I want to just get your opinion on this, or not opinion, but I want to get your advice on this. So when you're helping people learn how to use this as a tool to process through emotions. So when I think about mindfulness, it's like bringing a flashlight into our internal world. We're all of a sudden going from unconscious kind of sleepwalking, not paying attention to what's happening between our ears, to a place of consciousness, of becoming awake, of understanding that, oh, these thoughts are connected to my emotions and they're causing me to behave in certain ways that are leading me to this result of my life. And when you're working with clients and getting them to kind of explore this internal world inside of their heads and bring a sense of mindfulness to what's happening, what are some of your go-to like journal prompts or guidance of how they can begin to turn that light bulb on through writing?
So my favorite one is one that I write about in my book. The book's called The Power of Writing It Down. So if you want to know more about this prompt, you can grab a copy of the book and I teach it. I spend several chapters teaching the prompt there. Cool. But the prompt is called the Infinity Prompt. And the reason I love it so much is it gives you endless content to write about. So one of the biggest complaints I get from people who want to begin writing but don't know where to start is they'll say, I don't know what to write about. Yeah. This prompt will give you endless material to write about. And it's your life that you use as material. I say this prompt gives you a way to metabolize the experiences of your life, meaning that as things happen to you and you write about them, you'll be able to break down the circumstances to bring that consciousness to the event like you were talking about, to see it more clearly, to see it in a correct light, to take from the experience what's helpful and good for you, and then to leave the rest behind.
Oh, that's good.
So this prompt will help you to do that. It happens in 4 steps. So the first step is to choose an event from your life that feels charged. And by charged, I just mean that it has some electricity to it. So this can be like an event that has a lot of electricity to it. It could be a loved one that passed away that you don't feel like you have fully processed the loss or the grief of this person. But if you're new to this, I don't necessarily recommend picking something that's that big for you. Yeah. You could start with something as small as like the guy who cut you off in traffic yesterday. And that's enough. It's got a little bit of energy to it. It made you feel something. Maybe you haven't quite identified what it made you feel, but that's all that you need. You just need a little bit of energy or electricity to the event in order to make this prompt work. Then the first thing that you do when you pick up the pen and put it to the paper is you try to list out the facts of the situation. In other words, you're just going to tell yourself in this piece of writing what happened. And you do not have to do this in full sentences, and you do not have to do it in paragraphs, and you don't have to get the grammar right, and you don't have to spell everything correctly. All you have to do is just list out what happened. So first, this is what happened, then this happened, then this happened, and finally this happened. That's the prompt that I give people to get started here. Think of yourself in this part of the prompt like a journalist or a reporter who's reporting very unemotionally on this topic, and try to see if that can help you bring some clarity and some light to what actually took place. A lot of times what will happen for people when they're in this part of the prompt is they realize they don't really remember the details. Right. Very accurately. That's what I'm thinking. Like if you're trying to remember a text message. Yeah. You're trying to remember like a text message conversation and you're like, actually, I don't remember what she said. I'd have to go back and look. So if you can go back and look, if it's a text conversation, go back and look. But if you can't, just notice where there are holes in the story for you. And then the next step in the prompt is to list out the thoughts that you have about this situation. So the prompt I give people to get started here is the story I'm telling myself is. So imagine the difference. Like if a guy cuts me off in traffic, this is the situation I'm writing about that feels very charged. I've listed out what happened. You know, I was driving on such and such a highway. It was this time of day. It was like really, really rainy outside or sunny or whatever the weather was. You set the scene. This is what took place. He cut me off. He flipped me off. I, swerved to miss him, whatever it was. And then as you're writing about the story that you're telling yourself, this is incredibly revealing because imagine the difference between telling yourself the story, wow, that guy was having a really bad day. Right. Versus telling yourself the story like, I'm basically invisible. No one gives a shit about me. Wow. Everybody disrespects me. Those two stories have a really different tenor to them. They have an incredibly different energy. And it can be really revealing as we bring more consciousness to our lives and we realize like the story that I made up about this was X. And I don't really know if that was the story, but I get to decide whether I want to carry that story into other parts of my life or whether I'd like to lay that story down here and come up with a new story. I always say, when you write your story, you take back your life. You take back your life from the critical and negative thoughts in your head. You take back your life from your parents or your family of origin. You take back your life from the media, from advertising. You take back your life from Instagram. Take back your life from anxiety. Take back your life. You finally get to sit in the driver's seat of your own life and say, like, do I want to tell myself this story over and over and over again? Or do I want to come up with a new story?
Well, and I think it's important too, and I love the distinction that you have between facts and thoughts, because a lot of us mistake thoughts for facts. A lot of us think that, like, the way we've interpreted it, the way we've written the story, the narrative that we've given it, or the meaning we place on it is God's truth. Like, you can't argue with it, but it's not. It's actually just an opinion based on our previous life experience or whatever, or insecurities or our fears that are creeping up, and we're thinking it's true. And I think this is what is so powerful, is when we become mindful of those thoughts as thoughts. Like, this is not a fact, even if I thought it was. It's actually just a thought. It's only one thought among a lot of different thoughts I could be thinking about this one particular thing. And that moment of mindfulness gives us the power to shift it and change it in a way that feels more empowering or whatever. And I think that's like our point of power, is that awareness that actually these thoughts aren't facts. They're just an opinion. They're subjective.
Yeah. A great example of that. I taught a workshop. This is a few years ago now, but a woman who came to one of the workshops, when I walked the group through this prompt, and the fact that she wrote down that she wanted to work on in her life was, she wrote the words, "I'm fat." So as she was sharing her example with us, and as she shared that example, I had her come up in front of the whole room, and I said, "Can you raise your hand if you think Amy is fat?" And of course, like, not a single hand goes up in the whole room, but I'm like, this is a great way to test whether what you think is your fact is actually a fact, is ask other people if they think it was also true. Wow. If there's a discrepancy, it's not a fact. So I started digging a little bit with her, and what I found out, the fact was she had gained 10 pounds in the last few months of her life, and she was really wanting to lose the 10 pounds. So I'm like, that's a fact that can be verified. It's data. You can stand on a scale and you can know that you gained 10 pounds. So that's a fact. I've gained 10 pounds. That doesn't, the story that you're telling yourself about that 10 pounds is, I'm fat. And imagine how you're feeling about the story, or how you're feeling about the fact would shift if your story about the fact shifted. Yeah. So that's the third piece of the prompt, is writing about the emotional environment that's created when you think this thought. So aside from the event, like, let's put the guy cutting you off in traffic totally aside. If the story I'm telling myself is, I don't matter, what's the emotional environment that creates for me? And also, bonus question, when are other times in my life when I have felt this way? Because what you'll start to see is that the fact is interchangeable. The event from your life is interchangeable with the guy cutting you off in traffic, or the guy who ghosted you, or the boyfriend who dumped you, or your dad who never would pay attention to you at home. That's interchangeable. The story is the same, and the emotional environment is the same. And this is what brings the awareness to you that you're like, oh my gosh, I can decide to change the story that I'm telling myself. And maybe this will start to have an impact on the result that I'm getting in my life.
Dang, that's like a mic drop moment right there. It's like, okay. It's like, what do they say? How you do one thing is how you do all things.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Like, it's a pattern.
Yes.
I mean, your lens, your perception becomes a pattern. It's how you perceive the world. It's how you interpret the world. And so, like you said, no matter what happens, when you're unconscious of that story, of that narrative, it ends up becoming a program that you're running. You're on autopilot that you don't even know that's happening. And yet it's controlling your whole life. And that is like, this gift is, it's shining that light bulb, flashlight on these patterns, these programs, and giving you the opportunity to shift it. So powerful.
I also want to add one more thing, because if you're listening, before you get really down on yourself, that I feel like when I first started learning about the idea of manifestation, I would get really frustrated, because I would feel almost like a sense of blame or shame, like I was creating this reality that I was living in. So if before you feel like that, before you feel like, oh, so you're saying like I created this guy who cut me off in traffic.
Right.
The recent epiphany for me is this. What an incredible grace that I would repeat this pattern in my life so that it can't stay the same. My only opportunity to change the pattern is to see it on the movie screen of my life that I'm living. So the guy who cuts me off in traffic, whether I created that or didn't create that, whatever, what a great grace that is in front of me on the movie screen, because it is the only way for me to tell what the emotional environment, what the inner landscape looks like.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I have no way to see it. So this is the beauty of putting words on the page too, is that as we begin to write our story on the page, you see clearly the inner landscape. You see the emotional environment. And it's there that you find you've got a handhold or a foothold to start to create some meaningful change.
Yeah. And then to me, it ends up being liberating in the fact that you're not a victim to that unconscious mind causing all these things or responding to all these things in a way that you're not even present to. And all of a sudden it's like, ooh, do I want to believe that? Do I want to write it this way? Do I want to remember it this way? And you take your power back. And that feels really empowering and like liberating for me. And it's like, at first it's a hard pill to swallow. I think there's that moment. It's like getting the diagnosis, but then you can come up with your treatment. Then you can come up with the medicine metaphorically.
Yeah.
But you have to know what you're dealing with first in order to be able to do that. And it takes a lot of compassion, I think, to know that most of our coping strategies and programs have been based out of trauma, have been based from learning how to get through the best that we can, to earn love or to receive love in really horrible circumstances or just manipulative, tricky circumstances. So it's like, I don't know. I just think about so much grace and compassion and empathy we can have for our former selves who were doing the best that they could to navigate when they weren't conscious. So to me, it's like, I love the part of myself that, was 240 pounds and unconscious, that she was eating through all of her emotions. I love her because that was really resourceful, like of her to figure out that food was a way to cope, like go girl, go, and then as I became more conscious, like I could choose a different way, but I really appreciate her resourcefulness at that time. And I think about all my former selves, just the resourcefulness I had, even if it was sideways. I'm here. I got through it.
Sure.
I've processed and coped my way through life. And now I know more so I can do different. So
better.
I think, what is that saying? Like know better, do better. Is that right?
Yeah.
So after sharing this, I know that everybody's going to want to go get this book because it is amazing. And you really do, like, you make it. What I love about your writing style is, and I say this not only as your friend, but just as somebody who appreciates your work, like it's so approachable. And I think that for anyone who wants to cultivate deeper awareness in their life, this is a book you've got to get, because it, like Allie breaks it down step by step for you and makes it compelling in a way that you're like, oh my God, I got to go try this out. I want to put my pen to paper. It doesn't feel overwhelming anymore. So tell everybody where they can find you, where they can snag the book, how they can stay connected to you.
Yeah, you can buy the book wherever books are sold. I like to encourage people to go to their local bookstores because independent bookstores are hurting so badly right now and we want to keep them open. So go to your local bookstore. They will be carrying the book, but also all the big box retail stores, Target, Walmart, Amazon, etc. They all carry the book. You can find me on Instagram. It's probably where I'm the most active, at Allison Fallon. Allie,Ally, and then Fallon, just like Jimmy Fallon. So
just like Jimmy Fallon. I love it. Well, I will post all the links to all of that in the show notes. As we conclude, is there any last words of wisdom or anything else you want to share before we sign off?
I just want to say I wrote this book specifically for people who don't necessarily consider themselves writers. I know the word writing is in the title and that can sometimes be intimidating for people. And even my sister was like, I wouldn't have read this book if it weren't for you. And she's like, and I was literally sobbing through half the book because it was so helpful for me. So that was important for me to hear because, the original title to the book was Find Your Voice. It's the name of my company. And I think my publisher made a great argument for changing the title to The Power of Writing It Down because it really tells you what you're going to get from the book. But the drawback is that word writing can have an effect on us where we think like, oh, this is not a book for me. It's a book for writers. Yeah. And I just want to say, I wrote this book for people like you who are listening, who are on a path of personal growth. You're in this journey. You want to be the best version of yourself. You want to become more empowered. You want to create the life that you've always dreamt of. And writing is simply a tool to help you get there. It's one tool in your tool belt. It's not going to, by itself. It's not like this miracle drug or something, but it's an incredible tool that you have access to that you don't need a bunch of money. You don't need any special equipment. Like you need a pen and a piece of paper. And I hope this book can be a support to those of you who are on that journey. You're my people. So
y'all go hang with Allie on Instagram. She always is like, you just give such valuable content, whether it's through your lives or your regular posts. Thanks, you guys are going to want to stay connected to her. And you have your own podcast as well.
I do.
So, and it's the Find Your Voice podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I was like, I had this moment of second guessing it. So y'all go listen to the podcast. She has phenomenal guests on as well. But girl, thanks for hanging. Thanks for having this convo with me. I appreciate your voice. And let's go on a walk ASAP. Okay.
Amen. I love it.
All right, girl. Y'all, thank you for joining Allie and I today. Thank you for listening. And as always, share this episode with your girlfriends, put it on your social media and your story, tag me, tag Allie, let us know your big takeaways so that we can reshare them. But until next week, remember that the purpose of life is to be grateful, to be great, and to be full. I'll see y'all next week. Bye. Hey y'all, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you got some amazing nuggets to take home and start implementing into your life. And if you're looking for the show notes and links, head on over to maryhyatt.com/show. And if you loved it, why not bring your girlfriends along this journey of becoming fully alive with you? Just give a quick share of this episode to your social channels and enjoy those debriefing convos with your besties. Thanks again, and I can't wait to connect with you next week.